I'm Charlie Pillsbury. I'm a member of a UCC church in New Haven, Connecticut. And I've been active. Really, our church has been supporting a mission work in Colombia since the early 2000s. And I made my first mission trip to Colombia in 2008. And then have made several other trips since then. And I see the role of this partnership is basically to support our mission co-worker in Colombia, Michael Joseph, and also to support the work that Global Ministries is doing in Indianapolis. So,
hi, folks. I'm Michael Joseph, mission co-worker now here in Colombia. I've been here since 2007 in that role. I've actually lived in Colombia for a total of about 12 years. Did some human rights work here in Colombia before working with Global Ministries. My appointment over these last 11 years has basically been with our two partners, which is the Peace Commission of the Council of Evangelical Churches or of Protestant Churches of Colombia, and with Justa Paz, which is a Mennonite peace and justice organization here in Colombia. My appointment right now is through Justa Paz to work with a new ministry called Café Paz, which is an acronym in Spanish, but is essentially a peace studies center that has 5 member organizations that came together to create this Peace Studies Center. And so that's, right now, most of my focus is on helping develop that Peace Studies Center, doing peace building training, peace building research, and taking action for peace. All of the 5 members are Protestant church organizations that are members of that Peace Studies Center.
Hello, everyone. My name is Angel Rivera Agosto. I am the area executive for Latin America and the Caribbean here at Global Ministries, serving in my 4th year on that capacity. Before working here, I was one of the secretaries of the Latin American Council of Churches, working all around the continent. And we had working in Colombia from that moment, so I am quite familiar with the situation of Colombia. And I'm very glad to be here. I'm ordained minister of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in Puerto Rico, but now working here in Indianapolis at Global Ministries. I'm very glad to be here. I'm very glad to share with you our work and to be available for any question or concern. Yeah.
Well, maybe I'll ask you, Angel, since we finished with you, to kind of begin, because you've just been to Bogota, and you were there for again. You're talking about it on our last call. It was a 3rd meeting of a global Christian forum that doesn't always meet in Bogota, but this year did, and you were there as a delegate of the Christian Church.
Yes, that forum, the Global Christian Forum, is an initiative sponsored by the main ecumenical or interchurch organization throughout the world. And when I say that, we can think on the Vatican at some point and the Alliance of Evangelicals at the other edge, so from the Vatican until the Alliance of Evangelicals, think about the World Council of Churches, think about the Pentecostal International Fellowship, and some other world communions and organizations that form and are part of this very interesting initiative. It's some sort of an ecumenism of fellowship on sharing witness and faith experiences rather than the WCC model or the World Council of Churches model of documents, advocacy, programs, and so forth. having the opportunity to be in Colombia, I will have also the opportunity to meet our partners and also to be with Michael and to make some strategic visits on projects or communities that we could visit at that time. So we did that. And pertinent or relevant to this meeting, I have to tell you that we were part of this ecumenical delegation composed by the World Communion of Reformed Churches, World Council of Churches, the Cuban Council of Churches, the World Student Christian Association, the WSCF Federation, and we had the opportunity to give follow-up into the fulfilling of the peace accords in Colombia in two very interesting moments. First, we had the opportunity to visit the president of the Special Court for Peace or Special Jurisdiction for Peace that formed part of the peace accords with Dr. Patricia Linares, and then the vice president of that forum, Xiomara Balanta. So we had the opportunity to visit them at their office and to receive some key information about how the system is working in these times in Colombia, taking into account that they have this particular prisoner called Jesus Santrich. Jesus Santrich is a member of FARC that has been imprisoned, charged by drug trafficking charges by the U.S. government. So the Colombian government arrested Mr. Santrich and pending on deportation to extradition to the U.S. to face those charges in U.S. soil. He has entered into a hunger strike, alleging that the U.S. doesn't have any jurisdiction on his case, but the Colombian government through this special jurisdiction for peace, because he's a FARC ex-combatant, and he needed to be tried. He needed to be tried on that specific forum. So we had the opportunity to visit there on the 26th of April, and also to give support to that particular process within the peace accords in Colombia. So that was a very interesting meeting. We had the opportunity to pray for those leaders and also to express the international solidarity in the fulfillment of the peace accords there.
Just to clarify,
yeah,
Angel, so, and maybe Michael too, that's a court that was created by the peace accord. This is a new court with special jurisdiction for issues that arise under the implementation of the peace accord. Is that?
Yeah, that is correct, Charlie, because this falls into the restorative model of justice designed within the peace accord. So I want to add two other things. Then on the next day, we tried to visit Jesus Santrich at the hospital because of his hunger strike. He has been very ill. His health has diminished. So we tried to visit him at the hospital there, but we couldn't make it, even though we made all of the administrative procedures required to visit Jesus Santrich. So we have a very unexpected press conference there, where we as international delegation could express to the Colombian press that we were not allowed to enter to the hospital and to talk to Jesus Santrich, even though we were into a humanitarian mission to see him and to see that he's all right, you know. So we also had that opportunity to speak on the Colombian press and to express our solidarity on the peace accords. So that's the second thing that I want to add. And then the third thing that I want to add is that we had the opportunity to visit the new territorial spaces for the reincorporation of FARC fighters, ex-fighters that are now into the civil society. So we had the opportunity to go to Tolima, to the Icononso community, and we had the opportunity to speak with two ex-FARC fighters, Juan Jesus David Albino and Juan Carlos Ordóñez, and they were sharing with us how the government has not fulfilled or the accords, the different ways that the government is not complying with the peace accords in terms of the socioeconomic development of the communities, the infrastructure that they were supposed to build for them, and also the education process for the children of those communities. So it was very informative, that interview with these two persons, and we could see how fragile is the peace process in Colombia at this moment. It's a very fragile process. It's a process that it is not working properly from the government point of view. So I think that we need to strengthen our solidarity, our presence, and to continue working in favor of the fulfillment of the peace accord.
Angel Luis, I think maybe what I can add is that, broadly speaking, the activities that Angel Luis was involved in, and that he and the others that he mentioned that were here from the international community, the ecumenical organizations that were here 2 weeks ago, kind of fit within the work of DPAZ, the Interchurch Dialogue for Peace, which is this coalition of ecumenical organizations, churches, faith-based organizations here in Colombia that came together 6 years ago to support the peace process between the FARC and the Colombian government. And this situation around Jesus Santrich's arrest on drug charges from the DEA, broadly speaking, is probably one of the biggest crisis moments in terms of the implementation of those peace accords right now. Some analysts here in Colombia would say if he is in fact deported or extradited to the United States, it could sort of mean the collapse of this transitional justice system. It would mean that the peace accords are failing, and this transitional justice system that's been set up in the peace accords is a failure, and that it could lead to more defections from the demobilized FARC soldiers, FARC combatants that have demobilized as a result of the peace accords. So it's a really crucial moment right now, and a lot of it kind of revolves around what happens with Jesus Santrich. So DPAZ has been really focused on both addressing the Santrich's case specifically, trying to ensure that it is the transitional court that addresses his case, that he not be extradited unless that transitional justice court says that's what should happen. And also, sort of try to keep him alive. His health is very precarious at the moment. So even though the visit 2 weeks ago wasn't able to happen, he's luckily still alive. He's still in the hospital, and DPAZ right now is working on trying to get approval for a pastoral delegation that would include both Colombian pastors and international folk here in Colombia to be able to visit. Of solidarity, encouragement, encourage him to keep to stay alive because of the importance that he represents to the peace process in Colombia. So that's really kind of a focus of DPAZ. DPAZ this past week, since Angel has left, has been working on a whole plan for political advocacy around the peace accords, trying to ensure that the peace accords are protected, respected, and will continue to be implemented. One of the concerns around their future implementation is that presidential elections are coming up here in Colombia in under 3 weeks. So 2 weeks from this coming Sunday, on May 27th, we'll have presidential elections here in Colombia. The front runner at this point is Ivan Duque of the far right-wing political party associated with former President Uribe, who've been openly hostile to the peace accords. At times they say they'll continue to implement them, and at other times they talk about tearing up and shredding the peace accords. So there's a lot of concern about what will happen in those upcoming presidential elections. So a lot of DPAS's advocacy focus has also been and is going to be with the international community, with United Nations and others who could sort of, ensure that no matter who's elected president in Colombia, international law and essentially international treaties ensure that the peace accords must continue to be implemented in Colombia. So that's been a big focus of DPAS over the last few.
And what's your relationship with DPAS, Michael, as our mission co-worker?
Yeah, at this point, Café Paz, all of the members, the 5 organizations that comprise Café Paz, who I'm assigned to work with, are all members of DPAS. So though Café Paz itself is not technically a member of DPAS, I'm often seen as one of the international supporters of DPAS. DPAS in Spanish is the Interchurch Dialogue for Peace, and so all the international groups that kind of help DPAS are part of DPAS. They consider us co-dialogers. We're part of that process. So I'm often called on to or asked to help, especially with the advocacy work that DPAS does, especially on the international level. So, for example, right now we're working on trying to get a meeting with the U.S. Embassy to speak with the political affairs section of the U.S. Embassy, State Department, to try to get sort of their official position. What is the U.S. position on the implementation of the peace accords? Are they understanding the political implications of an extradition request of Jesus Santrich? And what that might mean for the peace accords. That's a big concern right now. As well as advocacy efforts that will be happening soon in both New York and DC. Jenny Neme, current executive director of Justa Paz, is actually just traveled to the US 2 days ago. And she's gonna be visiting New York, the United Nations in New York, and State Department and Congress folk in DC over the next few weeks. So I kind of play a role there in helping coordinate some of those advocacy efforts, especially the international side of advocacy with the DPAS. So that's DPAS a little bit. In terms of Justa Paz, which is our other one of Global Ministries partners, the Mennonite Peace and Justice Organization.
And Jenny Neme is the director of Justa Paz.
Jenny Neme is currently the director of Justa Paz, exactly. One, I guess maybe to report a little bit on the work that Justa Paz is doing, that's outside of the work that it does with DPAS, is work both continuing to monitor ongoing violations of human rights in Colombia, attacks against human rights defenders, particularly those associated with Protestant church sector, as well as working to prepare communities in rural areas across Colombia where we have churches that have been affected by the conflict in Colombia, to prepare those communities, work with those communities to be able to engage with the transitional justice mechanisms that have been created by the peace accords that Ana Luis mentioned. So preparing communities that have had folks that disappeared during the conflict to engage with the committee that will search for disappeared folks, to help them prepare their truth of how their community was affected by the conflict, to be able to share that with the Truth Commission, and to prepare cases of human rights violations that might be presented to this transitional justice court that will try cases related to the armed conflict. So Justa Paz is working with about 4 or 5 different communities at this time to sort of prepare them for those opportunities when they become available in the next weeks, months, years. The Truth Commission just officially started its work yesterday. Or were just installed yesterday and are just now beginning their work. They have a 3-year mandate. So we expect that there will be opportunities pretty soon for our communities to engage with the Truth Commission. And I think there's a lot of hope around the Truth Commission, recognizing that sometimes the actual judicial systems, there's a lot of opposition to it being able to function. A lot of concern about who all was named as judges to that transitional justice court. But there's a lot of hope in the Truth Commission that, if nothing else, maybe the truth of what happened during the armed conflict here in Colombia will come out. The head of the Truth Commission is a highly respected Jesuit priest, Pacho de Ru. The human rights organizations, victims organizations trust him, believe in him. So there's a lot of hope, I think, at this time around the work that the Truth Commission might be able to do.
Just say, I think this is an extraordinary time to be engaged with Colombia. We started, I think, the partnership to support, communities under siege by this 50-year, 60-year civil war, which has, after 4 years of negotiations in Havana, ended with this peace accord, which is still very controversial in Colombia. And so sometimes peace groups think, well, the work is done because we have a peace accord. But I think as Angel and Michael are pointing out, the work, in some extent, is just beginning. The work of peace building. So I think it's a very exciting time to be engaged with the Protestant Church and the work it's doing in Colombia. But there's my soapbox talk. Turn it over to you, Ed and Ruth, with questions that you have that you want to bring answers back to the group you're working with.
I do have a question. This is Ruth. And hello, Jerry. I knew you long ago. This is Ruth Brandon. My question relates to the relationship between the Truth Commission and transitional justice. I'm familiar with the South African Commission, which was able to forgive things, but it sounds as if you have two bodies. If people come with their truth and it is spoken, what happens to them and what happens to the people that were spoken about? Is it handed over to the transitional justice judges? And I did hear that you're talking about a restorative justice, which is what one would hope for. But what is the setup there?
Sure. Yeah. In the peace accords, under the area of truth and justice, under what the transitional justice mechanisms, the peace accords create three mechanisms. So you've got two of them, which is the actual court, which is called, in the Spanish translation, the translation in English will be the special jurisdiction for peace. That would be an actual court. That's who Angel Luis met with week before last. The second mechanism, that court essentially tries crimes committed during the conflict, any crime related to the armed conflict.
Okay, so the crimes related.
So that's the court. That's one of.
Okay, go ahead.
Related solely to the armed conflict, exactly. Crimes that don't have anything to do with armed conflict would be tried in the normal Colombian courts. Crimes that happen after the armed conflict or after the peace process, in the case of the FARC, would be tried in the normal Colombian justice system. And the sentencing from that court should have a restorative justice focus. And it establishes a maximum of, I believe it's 7 years of not jail time, but possibly of physical restriction of some sort, where if someone's found guilty of a crime, it should have restorative focus. So maybe they have to go to a rural community, help build a community center.
Okay.
and live in that community for 3 years or 5 years or for a maximum of up to 7 years. So that's kind of the focus of that court, which is just now being organized. I mean, they haven't started hearings, they haven't started trials, etc. And their first big test is the case of this commander who's now been accused of drug trafficking. A second mechanism is the Truth Commission, which is to function, this kind of gets into your specific question, is to function completely separately from the Special Jurisdiction for Peace. So it is solely focused on gathering and publishing the truth, trying to tell the truth of what happened in the armed conflict. So communities or individuals that share information with the Truth Commission, that information is not legally binding in any way. It is not handed over to the Special Jurisdiction for Peace for trial. So it's, you know, it's solely a truth-telling, truth-gathering role. And then the third, and likewise, not necessarily the information in the Special Jurisdiction for Peace would go to the Truth Commission. They're very explicit in the peace accords that they're very separate mechanisms.
Okay.
The third mechanism is the committee to search for the disappeared. I don't have the figure on the top of my head, but like over 50,000 people have been disappeared in Colombia during the conflict. You know, folks who generally it's assumed are dead, but there's no trace of you know, what happened to them, where their bodies are, where their remains might be. We understand that the two sides in the conflict may have a lot of information about where the remains of those folks are. So a special committee has been created to try to find the remains of the disappeared in Colombia. And that's an entirely separate mechanism as well. And that's been given 20 years mandate for the next 20 years to search for the remains of the disappeared in Colombia's conflict. So those are the three, what they call mechanisms that have been created for transitional justice as a result of the peace accords.
My other question is in terms of preparing people to have peace when they have been at odds with each other. I was in Mozambique. It was a much shorter period. They had first a colonial war to gain independence and then another war which lasted some years longer after supposedly they were independent, but South Africa and Rhodesia fostered those to fight against them. And I know that the Christian Council of Mozambique worked very hard, both in refugee camps and in communities where the opposing forces had been, to prepare people for the time to live together again. And I'm wondering if that is part of what is happening.
Yes, that perhaps was a piece that I left out of what I was sharing in terms of a third partnership that we have is the work that I'm most closely related to is the Café Paz Peace Studies Center. And we are in the process right now of starting a restorative justice focused process with 2 communities where these FARC demobilization camps or reintegration communities currently are in Colombia. When the FARC demobilized, they concentrated in 26 different camps, if you will, or communities to disarm and demobilize and reintegrate into society. About 7,000 FARC, ex-FARC combatants divided into those 26 different communities. So as Café Paz, we've received funding now to start a restorative justice process in 2 of those 26 communities. And it will be a process where we bring together both former FARC combatants and what we call the receptor community, the community, civilian community that lived in those communities, lives in those communities, but lived in those communities prior to the arrival of these former FARC combatants. And so really the focus there is on exactly what you're talking about. How do we both prepare the community to receive them, prepare the FARC to now engage in a new role with a new structure, in civilian life outside of what has been created by the peace accords. This is just churches working to help with that reintegration of both reintegration of the FARC soldiers, but also sort of preparation of the civilian community, which are largely peasant communities, farming communities that are receiving this influx of former FARC combatants. So actually tomorrow, myself and Angelica, who some of you know, Angelica Rincon from Justa Paz, will be traveling back out to Icononso, the same community that we visited last week with Angel Luis, to talk with them for the first time, sort of officially, about this proposed restorative justice project that we hope to carry out with them.
It's very important work. It can all fall apart if people can't tolerate being together.
Yes. Yeah. And in fact, it really comes out of previous visits that we made to that community where they expressed to us and literally asked us for help in sort of conflict management, conflict transformation. Literally, they said to us, when we were at war, we had a top-down military structure where if there was any conflict, you just took it to the commander and the commander made a decision and you executed and did whatever the commander said. And that ostensibly resolved the conflict. Mm-hmm. And they said, we recognize no longer will work for us, both for our internal conflicts and with any conflicts that we might have with the broader community. So we need to learn how to handle conflicts, how to make decisions, how to resolve differences, both amongst ourselves and with the broader community that we're now a part of. Can you help us with that? So that's really where this project comes from.
May that go well.
Thank you. Thank you. It's exciting.
So Ed, your process questions.
Well, right now I'm listening to what Michael is saying. I'm wondering, this far away out here in little Sequim, Washington, and out in the Pacific Northwest, what we can do. What is it that we can do from this far away to help in this process, other than prayers of support and those kinds of things? I guess that kind of leads then to the question of what would a partnership look like, and what would the role of a partner this far away be according to your vision?
I want to answer that question.
Okay, please, Angel.
Partnership with Colombia would be a partnership of accompaniment, of presence, and advocacy. It's important that we make a difference from other types of partnership that sounds more like a hands-on experiences.
Right.
Where you go to build something or to, I don't know, to put some houses, or maybe if our partners guide us to accompany on that sense, we will do it in the near future. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But up to this moment, the important framework for partnership is a partnership of accompaniment, solidarity, and advocacy. It's important to accompany and to show our solidarity in terms of the fulfillment of the peace accords, telling to our Colombian partners and also to the Colombian institutions that we, from the international organizations like global ministries and the World Community Reform Churches or some other, that we have very high expectations in terms of the fulfillment of the peace accords that they have designed so to achieve peace with justice and reconciliation. So it's a matter of us being available to accompany, to engage into relations, to advocate with our government here in the U.S., with the Congress, in the United Nations, along with some other nations or other people, but then so our churches can be aware of what is going on in Colombia and to accompany with prayer, advocacy, and presence. That presence can be worked into pilgrimages, groups that could travel there, visit communities, to engage in conversation with people that that made the option for peace in the communities, also to speak with our embassy, the U.S. Embassy, also to speak with the government officials and victims and perpetrators. And let me tell you, Ed and Sue, the experience of engaged in conversation with victims and perpetrators as they look for reconciliation, that is really priceless. You won't live an experience as profound and spiritual as to see people that were fighting to each other to get together and to make the option to build peace with justice and reconciliation. I have lived that in my travels. And let me tell you, the Spirit of Christ is there when you see the experience of these two people engaging to forgiveness, reconciliation, and seeking together for peace with justice.
What would you like to add to that, Michael?
Largely that I completely agree. Though, I mean, the three components. I mean, Ana Luisa and I are obviously on the same page here. It's accompaniment, and a big component of accompaniment can be presence by coming down here and showing that accompaniment physically by being here with folks, and then advocacy. And you've heard throughout the things that we've shared today the role, the very important role that the U.S. government plays in terms of peace in Colombia. So we have a large role to play with our own government, doing advocacy with our own government in the U.S. To ensure that the U.S. government maintains a commitment to the peace accords and to peace in Colombia broadly. Specifically on that, in our advocacy work that both the UCC and Disciples do, and Rebecca maybe can share more about this as well. But we join with a few organizations in DC, like the Latin America Working Group, and others that help us guide us in terms of some of that advocacy work that we can do. And right now there is the Latin America Working Group is involved in a campaign and action entitled "Peace Paper is Not Enough," where they're calling on the U.S. government to actually respond to the increase in the number of human rights defenders that have been killed since the signing of the peace accords. It's one of the ironies of a peace accord that the overall murder rate in Colombia has declined a lot in the last 2 years, but the specific targeting of human rights defenders, especially in certain regions of Colombia, has increased during the last 2 years. So more were killed in 2017 than 2016, and the murder rate of human rights defenders has been higher so far this year in 2018 than it was in 2017 up to this point. So
we as U.S. churches need to learn from what is happening in Colombia. It is not only a matter of seeing what is happening there and to be in solidarity with those people. That is part of it. But the other important element here is how much we as U.S. churches need to learn from the peace, justice, and reconciliation process that our Colombian partners are teaching us. So we can apply that with, saving the distances and the context. But how are we challenged as U.S. churches to engage into peace, justice, and reconciliation, learning from the Colombian experience? Black Lives Matter, the conflict with the immigrants in the U.S., the internal war that we are living here in the U.S., and how can we be agents of peace with justice and reconciliation? That is a key element of how to be the church here in the U.S. And we have lots of learning from the Colombian partners. So it's also an important experience for us to grow as U.S. churches, taking into account the wonderful experience, the wonderful and challenging experience that our Colombian partners are living there.
May I add something?
Sure, Lizette.
And I get emotional about this. I migrated to the States, middle-class Colombian, never touched by war, except that my dad was almost kidnapped, but didn't happen. Middle class, I migrated to the States, and only until I came to the States, I learned so much about my country of birth. Now I'm a naturalized citizen of the United States, and I've learned so much more about who I should have been and could be, and I am now, by the Ministry of Presence that Michael Joseph has had there, and also with the Ministry of Witness that they, along with Angel, Angel, and Charlie, and every single one of you, when I learned that there were people here in the States that care. He still touches me, and sometimes he's really helpless. But when you see that foreigners go to your homeland, as I did now, back in 2014, and I went in a chalupa, which is a boat that you go where people live, really far removed from the city, and you see that they're safer just because we showed up. I don't know what else is there, but the Ministry of Presence that makes a difference in people's lives. And now I have the chance to be here in the United States with this accent of mine, with this presence of mine, to do something, accompanying my country in the little ways that I can do, and being the true citizens that I am for the world. So that's it.
And I guess I'd like to add, I mean, if there's any possibility of organizing a delegation, I mean, there's actually on the Global Ministries website, there are these people-to-people pilgrimages, and there's a wonderful description of what one of those pilgrimages might look like in Colombia, and it tells about who's to pass. And but I know that as I was telling Ed before others joined the call, I was invited by my conference minister, Davida Foy-Crabtree, back in 2008 to go back to Colombia, where we've been doing, mission work and supporting peace and justice programs in Colombia. And I was so moved by that then led to my organizing a delegation, I think in 2011, that involved members of the Connecticut Conference and members of the Central Atlantic Conference, going to, again, to visit and just accompany and to learn what we can from Colombians and what they're going through. And that in turn, I have to say, has been amazing to follow. That then led to John Deckenbach, who, may he rest in peace, was then the conference minister at Central Atlantic, and Kent Salati, who became the conference minister in Connecticut, leading a delegation, I think in 2014, which Lizette just mentioned, that included Michael Neuroth from Justice Witness Ministries, and Alexis Qasim, who's both the joint UCC Disciples ordained pastor in the DC area. And that, I had to say, then led, and I give Angel enormous credit, because of the providential timing of the Caribbean Initiative, that led to an incredibly high-level delegation just last year that involved the head of our, John Dorhauer from the UCC, and I'm not sure who came from the Disciples, but also I think there were members of the
General Minister and President of the Disciples of Christ, Terry Hort Owens, was along with John Dorhauer. And let me tell you that she has been sharing her Colombian experience with everybody and at every level. So I think that was a very huge accomplishment on that visit. So
and there was also, what was striking is that you also managed, as part of our new fellowship with the United Church of Canada, to get a representative on that delegation from the United Church of Canada to join. So it was really a remarkable delegation. And, so anyway, I think that really ultimately, to answer your question, Ed, and Ruth, is if there's any possibility that some of you, and maybe not even those people on your committee, but your committee might sponsor a delegation, essentially a fact finding, to come back and say, this is what we've learned, this is what we can do. I think it's, it's life changing, and as Angel has mentioned, I mean, I've been in the field of dispute resolution much of my life. I actually teach mediation at Quinnipiac Law School, but what I learned about restorative justice in Colombia, informs the kind of restorative justice programs that are being created in juvenile courts, in dealing with indigenous communities, with Native American communities, and dealing with Black Lives Matters. I mean, what we need, we are so far away from really that kind of reconciliation, even in this culture. Colombia is a model, and it's really a beacon, and which right now is, I guess someone might say a dimly burning wick. I mean, we're worried that the presidential elections could douse the flames, and but I don't think that the spirit of peace and reconciliation will die in Colombia. It just will make it more challenging. So there's anyway. I'm really excited, as you can tell, by your interest, and to some extent, your participation on this call for me is an answer to prayers, because we've been trying to expand and build this Colombia Partnership, and it's been a slow. We've had, like I say, we have these wonderful delegations, but we're still learning, and right now there's so much going on in the United States. It's hard to get people to pay attention to anything that's going on outside our borders.
Right.
But what's going on outside our borders is incredibly important, and we have a lot to learn from them. So,
yeah.
So, but anyway, we're after the hour, but certainly Ruth or Ed, if you have some follow-up questions, please, ask them now, or follow up with Angel or with Michael, or I guess even Rebecca.
I will be at the Northwest Regional Assembly on the 18th to the 20th of May in 2 weeks. So I will be there personally to explore that possibility of the partnership with Colombia. So I will be very glad to do whatever you want from me. So I will be there to answer any question and to talk, more specifically in terms of how to build the possibility of this partnership.